We were running a little late here. So, anyways, okay. So today we're here to talk about. Well, you guys know I did my kind of whatever assessment of the first half of it, first 3.5 episodes last night. So I finished it up last night. Went over and advised everybody to go over and check out my buddy Ripper on YouTube and go check out his channel right now because he's digging up the dirt. He's digging up the dirt on Carol Baskin, and there is a bit of a a crumb trail leading right to her, in a sense. So he's developing things. He's just posted an interview with Anne McQueen today on his channel, an interview he had with her. So if you guys are interested, he also did another interview with a wife of somebody who worked for Don Lewis back when he went missing. And she had some very interesting things to say, folks. So I advise you guys to go check out the good work my buddy Ripper on YouTube is doing over on his channel. So, okay. Talking about Joe Exotic, talking about the big cat nuts. Sorry, folks, if I offend anybody, but those people are nuts. They're absolutely nutty. That situation, in my opinion, this situation, there should have been some kind of involvement, some kind of federal oversight of these parks, something that where they would have had a hand in looking around and seeing, making sure things were safe, developing maybe even regulations for these parks to operate because they have such deadly animals in them and that sort of thing, right? So I'm of a feeling that there should have been some oversight on all these things to begin with, because without any oversight, it's what allowed these people who were a bit out there and who were very unwilling to back down or compromise with each other. So it was a powder keg waiting to go off in a lot of ways. And meanwhile, there's these very dangerous animals in the mix, and there's whether or not what's happening to these animals is humane and all that sort of stuff. So, as I said in my first video, I was very conflicted about just the culture and the community of these people who are like insanely into the big cats. So I like I said, so all right, having laid that down, in the end of this thing, we get to the point where now Joe Exotic is kind of losing his grip on things. He's brought in Jeff Lowe, and this guy Jeff Lowe is supposed to be a big, investor guy and all that. He has all the right look. He drives a Porsche, and he brought Joe and entertained Joe at a penthouse or whatever at one point, but he had only rented it. It wasn't actually his. So he had duped Joe in a lot of ways to thinking he was more than what he was. And so eventually Joe ends up working with him to put the park in Jeff's name, thinking, oh, that'll work because then it'll force Carol Baskins to have to refile all her lawsuits now in a different name because, now Jeff would have been the owner. But Jeff ends up kind of taking over it, just takes it and starts taking over. And so Joe slowly starts to lose his grip on things. It doesn't happen immediately, though. I mean, obviously, he was the Tiger King. He was Joe Exotic, and people were coming there for the personality of Joe Exotic. I mean, so there was a certain amount of that. And so they couldn't just... So he still had a purpose and all that. But that's when he starts his run for president. And then that's unsuccessful, and he runs for governor. And, those are unsuccessful. Until eventually we get to the point where we find out he likely maybe misappropriated business money using it for political stuff or whatever is the way it looks. And we see Jeff, oddly enough, bringing all this up to Joe and scaring the hell out of Joe and saying, and then there's something else and I don't even know what it is. And I mean, he's like totally getting in Joe's head and eventually scares the hell out of Joe. And Joe goes and takes off and goes off to live a quiet life somewhere and doesn't even really tell anybody where he is. It took them a while, I guess, to find him. They had to track cell phone numbers. It was pretty crazy. Anyway, So he rides away from the whole thing because he sees he doesn't want all that trouble, right? So at least that's the way it would appear. But here's the problem with all this: Joe ends up going to jail because it starts with the murder for hire plot. See, and this is where the whole thing hangs for me. And if you hear me speaking positively about Joe Exotic in this, just understand I'm not speaking positive about Joe Exotic. Joe is just as fanatical as the rest of the people involved here. But when it comes down to it, who actually orchestrated this? I don't know what to call it other than a half-assed murder for hire, because that's what it was. And so who orchestrated it? Was it Joe? Was it Joe planning it? Or was it Jeff Lowe planning it? My opinion, folks, is it was Jeff Lowe. And why do I believe that? Because the guy that was there as the government's informant explains it very clearly. And I saw enough in the beginning, first 3.5 episodes to know, yeah, Joe Exotic's an idiot and threatened to kill Carol Baskins way too many times. And the fact that he threatened to put snakes in her, he threatened her with snakes, and then she ended up having snakes pop out of her mailbox at some point, doesn't bode well for Joe. Joe is a loose cannon. Joe, like I said, Joe has his issues, but he was all talk. He was really, for the most part, all talk. Okay? It's only until Jeff Lowe gets there, and then during one of these conversations where they're all, oh, yeah, kill the bee. Oh, yeah, let's go get her. Yeah, oh, I wish she was dead. All the normal things that they've been saying there for years, except now you have Jeff Lowe in the mix. And Jeff Lowe starts Google Earthing her house and the trail where she was riding her bike in this video that they had all seen. And he starts Google Earthing it and showing it to everybody. That's Jeff Lowe doing that. That's Jeff Lowe beginning to plan a murder for hire. That to me. And then who's the henchman? What are the connections of the henchman that was supposedly the hitman? Oh, he's Jeff Lowe's right-hand man? Well, that's very interesting. And how many times did we hear? I mean, and actually, now that I think about it, how many times did we hear that guy, Alan? What's his name? Paul?
Alan Glover.
Glover. How many times did we hear that guy telling all of us that he told Joe, "I don't work for you"? How many times? Oh, numerous times. So we know he's Jeff's guy, right? So here's my opinion when it comes to Joe Exotic. Do I believe Joe Exotic should be in prison for the murder for hire? No, I don't believe he was the one that actually really did any real orchestrating of it. I believe it was mainly orchestrated by Jeff Lowe and Mr. Glover. In terms of the euthanized cats and the various other charges that they came at him with, if he hadn't followed the proper procedure to euthanize those cats, and they can prove that in court, then he's guilty, and he's going to serve his time for those things. In my opinion, that's how I feel. I know I know some people out there are probably really like Joe Exotic, and I'll tell you what, there is a certain charisma about the guy. I mean, I don't even hate him. Even though I think some of the things about him are despicable, I don't hate him. He does have a certain charisma, but he's certainly, very, very eccentric. I'll just say that. And he's, it's like I said, he has a big mouth, and I think that's a big part of what got him into trouble. But when it comes down to it, and I'm going to open this up to your guys' opinions and Paul's opinion here in a second, but when it comes down to it, who did the actual orchestrating of this supposed murder for hire plot? And was the actual reason behind it, and the whole reason why Jeff Lowe brought Alan Glover around and everything so that he could eventually pull this move, was to bump Joe out completely so he could fully and completely take over. Was that, I mean, just think about cause and effect. You know what I mean? As we continue to talk. So now I've talked enough. I will give Paul a chance to offer some of his thoughts, and then we'll go over to the chat, folks.
Well, first of all, thanks, dude. You mentioned about the good work of your friend
Ripper.
Johnny Jack Ripper. Is that it?
Ripper on YouTube, folks.
Yep, Ripper on YouTube. Yeah. Well, hold on a sec.
Ali's with us. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Ali. I think we need to pay a little bit of a tribute to Erekose. They got a shout out by Steve Drizin this afternoon.
Oh, that was very kind of Steve. Yes.
Yes,
for those who were there at the meeting, they had a little Zoom meeting today, cocktail hour Zoom meeting. It was really cool, nice, a lot of good talk. And yes, Stephen Drizin actually mentioned me and talked about how folks like me and other people like me are getting out there and talking about this and how crucial that is. It was, but yes, I was very touched.
What was the question that somebody posed that caused your name to come up?
I don't exactly remember. What was it?
Well, it was what can people do? What can the ordinary people do?
Part of them answering that. Yeah, they were answering that question for a while. So yeah.
And you put hashtag something about they can talk about it.
I said, yeah, we can keep talking about it. Yeah.
Which is good. You know, that's I mean, look, you went all the way to Australia to present him a t-shirt, and now you're beginning to get payback. It's good stuff.
Right.
You know, that's what we want. You know, it's it doesn't take much for somebody like Steve, you know, to pay tribute to somebody like yourself who has been at this for a long time. And he actually alluded, didn't he, Steve Drizin, to the fact that there are people out there that know in some cases they know more about the facts of this case even than some of the attorneys do.
I would venture to say that's a fair guess, a safe guess.
And have actually pointed them in certain directions. For example, when we heard about that email that Ken Kratz had sent, was requesting a seat next to Tom Fassbender at the original oral arguments of the 3-panel on Seventh Circuit Court hearing. He mentions about the fact that we need to discuss the adjustment to Brendan's sentence. Well, I sent that to Steve Drizin, and he said, "No, I didn't know anything about this. Where did you get that?" Well,
that's his email right here.
Yeah, it's all over. It's all over social media at the moment, Steve. So getting back to your thing about Joe. I mean, you mentioned that he runs for president. I mean, what chance of an unhinged lunatic becoming the president of the United States?
I see where you're going with this, but
I mean, it's not as if America have gone for strange people to be the president, is it?
Right. Yeah.
Well, exactly. So anyway, no, he's a strange person.
Yeah, he is.
And he attracts some very strange people.
Yeah,
the question is, how dangerous is he?
How dangerous is Joe Exotic?
He didn't seem that dangerous when he was cooking up food for everybody.
No, but well, I'll put it this way. I don't hear any claims of anybody ever being murdered over at his side or anything serious coming out. Whether or not there's been maybe some brawls on that zoo between some of the people there running it, I don't know. I'll tell you one thing that's pretty obvious about that zoo when Joe was running it was from the general look of inside the trailers, obviously seeing Joe's first husband's teeth, what's his name?
That was the drugs that caused that. No, the first husband was called John Finley.
John Finley. Looking at his teeth, he definitely has what they refer to as meth mouth. You know, and so and you heard some reference in there, I believe. I remember hearing a reference to them saying there was some. Oh yeah, it was John Finley himself talking about that meth was involved and stuff like that. And apparently Trevor, who came from California, who was Joe's second husband, apparently Trevor was very much into it, except he liked to smoke it, apparently. So, anyways, so you got that going on there. That is potentially dangerous, but I mean, they're pretty much keeping to themselves, and you're not really hearing about anybody being hurt other than with Saf. Now, I got to wonder what was going on that day. I mean, I got to imagine Saf was used to reaching into the cages and petting tigers. So you got to wonder what caused that tiger that day to just take her arm and try to pull her into the cage and stuff, right? So that was pretty wild, but obviously she understood it wasn't. She obviously cared more about the park and the cats, and she didn't want anything bad to happen there, and so she was like back to work within 9 days of it happening. You know, had to have her arm amputated and everything.
Well, I bet it was quite interesting, wasn't it? How you got staff that worked there and that worked there a long time, and you know, people that obviously. He trusted them. They trusted him. You know, maybe he basically let them get on and run the park because he was so busy doing all his hit singles and everything else that he was into. Because I mean, he was into so many, and doing the TV shows and all that kind of stuff. And that's how they got the guy Rick Kirkham involved,
right?
The journalist who just within the last, I believe, 16, 18 hours has said that there will most likely be a follow-up to Tiger King, some more episodes.
Right. So Tracy Bowman asks, how did Joe make straight guys gay? Must be drugs.
Yeah.
I would say that when it comes to a drug addict, yeah, they'll be willing to trade, you know, favors or whatever, or, you know, maybe even a certain lifestyle so that they will always have a supply. It will happen with certain, especially with hardcore drug addicts who just find it, you know, impossible to live without their drug of choice. So yeah, it can happen. It's you know, it's weird. It's bizarre. Because you obviously Finley, he's done with Joe, goes right back to girls.
Yeah, I would say to Tracy, if you were watching the Zoom thing about Steve and Laura doing their questions, one of the questions they asked was, you know, what music do they like to come into? And they pointed out that in Australia, it had to be AC/DC. And as far as Tracy is concerned, I think that answers your question. Some of them are a bit AC/DC.
Yeah.
And yes, quite definitely the drugs. You know, the opportunity to not have to do any work and just be high all the time. Yeah, I can. You know, I mean, you can either go and work for Joe Exotic or you can work in a state science lab in Amherst. And
Allie brings up a good point. Allie brings up an excellent point right here. It's not just the drugs, too, folks. You got to understand. Everybody saw Joe Exotic as the guy who gave them the access to the cats, and those cats were equal to and possibly even more addictive than meth or heroin or whatever else you might want to like insert there. These cats had this effect on people. That's why I say the whole situation was so nutty and it needed oversight. You know, I mean, Doc was over there building a harem because these women wanted so badly to be with the cats. I mean, I'm so glad they found one girl that got away from Doc and they got her opinion about what was going on there. I was very glad that they found that young lady. You know, it's bizarre, but yeah, those cats, dude, are as addictive as any addictive drug you want to name. It's bizarre.
Anyway, but it is definitely nice to see Ali back on the scene. So great to see you, and look forward to doing another Gay Gordon's, Strip the Willow, Military 2-step, Boston 3-step. Anything goes, Ali. Anything goes. We'll show that dude how to dance.
Oh yeah. Gotta get together for a dance hour again.
Yeah.
That paid to work for her. Yes, exactly. Ali brings up another good point, because the people that were helping Carol were paying her to be able to help. Well, from what I understand, the people that were like full time there, I think I heard somebody at one point, they said they get something like $80 a week, or maybe $100 or something like that. It was to me, it seemed like a very low amount. But then again, I guess they get housing or whatever on the I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and as Travis points out, that the guy Bhagavan Antle, to give him his proper title.
Yeah.
Gives him a house. So and of course it was strange how he his mode of transport. By the way, you mentioned about the guy what's his name? Jeff. What was his name?
Jeff Lowe?
Jeff Lowe is the one name. The one name I haven't put down here. Yeah, Jeff Lowe. You mentioned about him and his fancy cars. I believe it was a Hummer and a Ferrari. But of course, that the guy Bhagavan Antle, his chosen form of transport was an elephant, wasn't it? Again, it was just all about impressing, wasn't it?
Well, that was a certain one of it, right? I mean, these people were feeding. They were feeding their own vanity, I think, through these cats. You know what I mean? It was so. I mean, and that much seems obvious, but see, the one thing that impresses me here is their ability to breed these cats. These cats are disappearing in the world, and so I was, as much as I felt a lot of the things these people were doing were despicable, I was amazed at the way that they were able to get these cats to reproduce. Trouble is, when you do this all in captivity, there's very little chance you could ever release them in the wild and over where they belong, and that they'll be able to adapt. I mean, but I was intrigued by the fact that they're able to breed them so quickly. It would suggest there may be a way of countering this species being endangered.
I must admit, I was staggered. I think it's something like 12,000 of these sort of dangerous cats in America. Or was it 12,000 tigers in America? There's only 4,000 in the rest of the world.
Right.
One in wild in Bengal, in India, and places like that.
Right. Do people pay to work for them just to be close to the cats? Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Some of these people are fairly fanatical about the cats. Absolutely.
So do you think there was a certain amount of Joe being set up by this informant James Garretson?
Well, James Garretson was doing what he was told by the government, by the Fish and Game, or was not Fish and Game, whatever it was. It's like the FBI, but for wildlife and that sort of stuff, right? But anyway, so he was working with them, and he was working with federal prosecutors. So he was just basically following orders. So I'm not seeing him as orchestrating Joe's downfall. He clearly chose to become a CI, though. And I think that him becoming a CI actually brought a bit of a yardstick to run through this thing, because as it moves forward after that, he's there and he's watching everything that goes on, and he sees the federal government bringing in an agent to act like a hitman and sit there and talk to Joe and get Joe all excited and whatever, but Joe never paid the guy. Okay, once again, Joe seeming again like he's just always talking, just yap 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 like a little chihuahua, where the bark is bigger than its bite. That's how Joe strikes me. then you have that CI talking about, and the CI is the one pointing it out. He's going, it wasn't Joe planning this. he's like, they were in their offices. They started, having the normal banter about Carol Baskins, and suddenly we got Jeff Lowe sending everybody links to Google Earth, right where the little path where she had been riding her bike in her latest video. And he's like Google Earthing it and sending it to everybody and telling everybody, oh yeah, we could hit her here and here from off in this distance over here on this hill or this and that and whatever. And he's starting to like line up how they could take sniper shots at her in her neighborhood. That's Jeff Lowe doing that. He's the one orchestrating, not Joe. So yeah, that's the part that kills me about this. So whether or not Joe needs to be in there for the infractions with cats and whether or not he, if all that is legit, that's if he did wrong, he needs to be jailed. But I personally think the murder for hire thing is a joke.
Well, I don't know if you have the same in America, but apparently on Britain's motorways before COVID and going back a while, when the motorways were busy, apparently the police used to play a game of basically they called it motorway snooker. And in the game of snooker, you have to pot a red and then a color, then a red and then a color. And so what they were doing was, of all the cars that they were seeing that were going along breaking the speed limit, they would go for the one that was the color that was next in snooker. And so you've got Travis there makes a point that there is a lot of politics. And if you can see that one of his,
I see it.
All right.
He had a big case in Nevada involving PETA, and Siegfried and Roy got a pass because Steve Wynn donated a lot of money to PETA, but Bobby Borosini was a target.
It's like you've got all these people doing wrong, but somehow the law enforcement decide they're the ones that they're going after. You've got all these cars going down the motorway doing more than 70 mile an hour, but because the next color in snooker is a green, we're waiting for a green car to go past.
Right.
We'll stop them.
Well, that's their way of trying to apply randomness to it, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen. It must go on in American football as well. You get the flag that there was the yellow flag thing that gets flown down because there's a
flag in football, yeah.
And you look at it and you think, but there's a whole load of fouls going on at that particular point. Why have the referees gone for that particular foul? When everybody's pushing and shoving and pulling in, and it's the same in rugby. You'll have a situation where there'll be a scrummage and something goes wrong and the referee will blame one side and he'll come up with one reason for it. Same scenario, isn't it? You've got. Yeah. I mean, look. No doubt. There has to be an offence. The threatening to kill somebody, like he was doing on his TV programs. Surely that's sanctionable,
right?
You can't just on TV threaten to blow somebody's head off, can you?
No. Well. And again, Joe was, but
yeah. But when you've got the evidence on TV,
No, Travis, I don't. Do tell.
Well, I presume somebody to do with.
Well, it has to do with something he's talking about. His earlier comment up here about Siegfried and Roy, the one you pointed, his other comment you pointed out. Yeah, when he was talking about that case, and so he mentioned Bobby Borosini at the end of it. So now he's asking you all know who that is. So now we're waiting for him to tell us.
Yeah, well.
A new episode will be out on Sunday. A new episode of Tiger King. Well,
on Sunday.
That'll be interesting.
But is that the official Tiger King documentary series that's involving the guy?
Well, TMZ is playing up something they're doing Monday.
Rick Kirkham.
So, sorry?
No, as I say, there was an article from just earlier today about the Rick Kirkham fella saying that he's that they're doing some more Tiger King. like the official series.
Right.
Yeah.
Right on.
One of the things I was going to ask you about though was it's another documentary that's just come out. I was quite interested to see and to read. Quite a lot of people were not in agreement with you over the fact that those drug cases all got thrown out. Did you notice that?
I want to make everybody clear on this. It's not. I don't disagree with the drug charges being thrown out. The fact that they were because of what Massachusetts allowed by not keeping the slightest bit of watch on their laboratories, created enough question, and that's an embarrassment for Massachusetts to deal with. Here's the thing, is that I personally think that if Massachusetts has gotten proactive instead of trying to bury it, they could have created a whole different situation there, where they could have looked at it and realized that they could have gone back and tested each bag themselves. At that, they could have sent these. Obviously they know that her tests were they obviously know what Dukin was doing with her tests, right? So there's a possibility there could be bags in Dukin's files that might be fake. They may not be real drugs, because she was just going off of the way 10 to 15 bags looked. And if they looked similar, then she just put them all, tested one of those bags, and then put the results for all the bags. You see? So there's possibility that any of the 9 to 14 bags that didn't get tested could go back and be tested, and there may be fake drugs there. Or the state could have gone back and tested them and found out there was real drugs. And then they could have dealt with this up front. That's, for me, that's my criticism of the state in the way that they could have handled this. But because they chose to do like Manitowoc's doing with Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey, and they tried to hide it, obfuscate it, AG's office lying about it, holding information back, all those things, and it ended up blowing up in their face. And it became this thing where pretty much all of them were let go. But I don't think it would have happened that way had they been proactive instead of trying to hide it.
The woman was Diane Coakley. Coakley, was that her name? The original Attorney General for
no, it wasn't Diane, wasn't it?
Coakley, though. Coakley. It was.
I think that might be the head one or something. Yeah.
No. She was the one that the day afterwards came out with the biggest load of BS you've ever heard,
right,
about the fact that because of their systems, they identified the problem with this Sonia Farak, and that there were only 2 cases that were affected, and you had that one district attorney saying, you just can't do that. You can't, all you can do is say, this is what we know that happened, and this is what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But to try and draw a line on it, under it so quickly, and the actions of that Kazmarek and that Foster woman, that was just appalling.
Yeah.
The way they treated that Luke Ryan.
Right. Yeah.
They did. Apparently, they did their investigation, and the only one they criticized was Luke Ryan.
Yeah. I'm furious. Like with that one judge who was basically calling Chris what's her face on her BS, and he was like, no, you're gonna provide those records or whatever. And I'm like, okay, good. He's realizing that there's some BS going on here. And then she ends up writing him a letter saying, oh no, it was already turned over. And that's it. That's it. Like, it was a lie. It had never been turned over. She just writes him a letter, and it's like poof.
And then you've got the Chris Foster woman saying in testimony that no, she had never actually looked at any of the supposed assorted lab paperwork. She hadn't looked at any of it. She was simply following her orders from Kazmarek and, thank you, Jerry, Martha Coakley.
Yeah.
Look, for me, the big question is this: if I don't think morally it's right for anybody who is accused of either being in possession of, using, or selling drugs to be accused and found guilty on the testimony of somebody who's as bad as them and is abusing drugs. And I think, throw the law out the window. Morally, that is wrong. Nobody in their right mind would want to be found guilty based on the testimony of somebody who's doing something far worse than they were. The one guy, the Pinata, what was his name? That was his second name. Roland Pinata, the Cuban fellow. He was sentenced to 7 years for $20 worth.
Right.
For $20 worth. If somebody broke into that lab and stole all of those 50 controlled substances, which is basically what she did, how many years would they be facing?
Right.
How much value is there in those controlled substances that they had there?
Right. It's a temptation, and it should have been being monitored a lot more closely.
Even the police, have to do drug testing, get tested themselves randomly every 2 years.
I'm sorry. Travis is trying to understand something. Travis, who's in charge? Who would be the proactive people in the state of Massachusetts, legally speaking, who would have stepped in and stopped obfuscating this? Who would that? What entity? Which entity would that be? In your opinion? Okay, well, now he's saying what I said. Okay, here we go. Now Travis is saying what I said. They could have, but didn't. Could have retested any of those and found out if they were real drugs or not. That's what the state could have done if it had been proactive.
How many years would that take? How many years would that take? Going back 10 years of Sonia Farak's?
Well, they could deal with what's in front of them at the time, right? Whenever somebody is challenging their conviction, they can then go back and test that and find out. If it's Dukins, that only works if it's Dukins because of the method that Dukin used. I'm sorry, everybody, but with Farak, I believe everything that Farak said was drugs. I believe it was drugs. Do you know why I believe that? Because she was getting high off it. So, if it wasn't getting her high, then it wasn't drugs, right?
But what gives them the right to find somebody guilty of doing something when the person that's actually accusing them, and this was made clear at the start, it's basically that drug analyzer that is accusing the person of being in possession or using drugs. What gives them the right to accuse somebody when they themselves are a worse abuser of drugs than the person that they are trying to convict?
That is a problem. I'm not saying it isn't. And I'm not saying that these techs should have been allowed to continue on in their jobs. I'm not saying those things. I am saying when you look at it, when it all happens and you're looking at the face of the situation, not necessarily all of those cases are wrong. They're not necessarily all wrong, but because of the method that Dukin used, there's some question, and people could potentially go back and have their bag tested, and it could come back as fake dope. That is a possibility with Dukin, but with Farak, and this is probably why most of hers went free. She was taking out the real drugs and replacing it with fake drugs. So you're going to go back and test those bags now, and you're going to find fake drugs. So yeah, that will set a lot of people free. But do I believe that Farak was lying about whether or not there were drugs in the bags? Well, no, I don't think she was, because she was stealing those drugs so she could get high herself. So yeah. Anyway,
do you know? I checked up last night. The guy. One of the reporters with the Globe is just an independent reporter in the Boston area. There's a guy in Musgrove, I think it was Scott Musgrove. We see some of his. Do you know how many cases it's added up to now? How many cases have been thrown out? 50,000 cases.
Yeah, well.
In the documentary, we hear about 22,000, then we hear another 15,000. So that's like, 36,000. It's now up to 50,000 cases. The state got a good kicking. They deserve it.
They deserve it.
They deserve it. They
Absolutely.
deserve. It's look, as that one court found out, as that one court decided, the state were responsible that Chris Foster, Crockley, Kosmeric, they were found guilty of fraud of the court.
Yes.
Fraud of the court. It sounds innocuous, but as they were saying, that is a huge accusation.
Right.
Well, a finding, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think she didn't get high on fake drugs. That's basically what I'm saying.
Irrelevant. Look.
So Travis saying that I don't care about being high when you test, but when you are getting high on the evidence, there's clearly a problem there, and clearly it's not ideal for somebody to be constantly getting high on meth, because what that means is they're probably getting less and less sleep over time. It's going to affect their performance. And so, the fact is, this is a black eye for Massachusetts because they didn't get in front of it. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to make this point come home for people. They could have gotten in front of it. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. But didn't. They didn't get in front of it, and so it has become the huge embarrassment that it is. And that's what it is. That's what it is. Now, this is what I'm saying. The thing about watching this thing, for me, the takeaway was to watch how many different people in the various agencies of a state will band together to prevent something embarrassing coming out. And it's shocking. And that's, for me, the takeaway from how to fix a drug scandal.
Well, what's really nice is it's nice to see how big a scandal it can be once it's exposed. I mean, how big is this case in Manitrock going to be once we finally get to the bottom of it? We were discussing that just on Wednesday night there with Fleetside. Was it Wednesday or Thursday? I think it was Thursday night.
Yeah, I think it was Wednesday.
Yeah. And and I mean, it's huge.
Yeah.
And I'm still getting guilty saying to me, so you think this is a big conspiracy? There are people involved in that had nothing to do with it. Why would they risk it?
Yeah.
Why would they risk it?
All compasses point north. It's not that they feel like, they don't even necessarily feel like they're risking anything. They just go along with their brothers. And it's like an automatic reaction, like a knee-jerk reaction. So there's not even really a whole lot of conscious thought that goes along with it. So who solved this problem? It was solved the way it always was: defense lawyers and a vigilant press. So this is a fair statement by Travis.
Well, I don't know. Has the problem been solved?
Ultimately, the defense lawyers, who was the guy you were talking about, is it Mr. Luke, right? And that ACLU lawyer obviously pushed this thing and pushed this thing and pushed it. And eventually they got some traction, and they got to the justice in it. And that's great. And Travis is right. It's not always how it happens. As we all know, there are things like, and they're just in their infancy and they're just barely starting to spring up, but there's things out there like conviction integrity units, okay, which are going to be huge and helpful in criminal justice moving forward, because when the state's finding their own problems and fixing them, it takes out a lot of the litigation, a lot of the adversarial process, and things get through quicker that way. So hopefully we'll start seeing more things spirited in that fashion, so that wrongful convictions, hopefully we can get the average time spent served on a wrongful conviction down from around 15 years, and we can hopefully get that average number maybe down a bit. Would be pretty nice. But obviously those things are appearing. It's not always defense lawyers, but I will say that in our society today, it's often really, really sharp defense lawyers that are taking these cases up and taking them to the highest courts and doing those sort of things. But
yeah, I mean, look, Vic Frizzell was an exception rather than the rule, wasn't he?
Right.
But another interesting thing, of course, was the fact that of those 50,000 cases, 90% of them were held at the state court. As the guy pointed out, these weren't major drug dealers, and people that are involved in major crime. Yeah. They are the ones that will not just be facing time because of their drug possession or use. There will be other crimes involved. They don't get a free pass,
right?
Do they?
No. No. I mean, and that's probably what most of these was just people that got popped for possession, and probably, in small amounts, because it, unless it was a manufacturer or unless it was like a with intent to sell or something like that, it's usually it would indicate it's a very small amount.
Yeah. So I mean that other guy that committed suicide, he was actually being set up by somebody who actually worked with the police, wasn't it? It was right. It was a complete setup to try and persuade him to do this sell, so that he could be arrested.
Right.
Yeah. But no, just many years ago, I was coming back from a gig. Let me explain. Many years ago, I got this letter through the post saying that my car was seen in Galashiels at 11:20 in the evening doing 43 miles an hour in a 30 mile an hour zone. You must provide details of who the driver was in Galashiels at that time, right? So I think, well, yeah, okay, I must have had my fast car out that night, okay, hold my hands up. And when I checked the date, I realised I'd done a gig that night in Peebles. At 11:20, I would have still been dropping off the keyboard player 20 miles away. So I went to my lawyer, right, a really good one down in Hoyk, and he said, "Oh, leave it with me, and I'll check with the police department and see if they've got a photograph." Because normally nowadays when they do you for speeding, it's based on a photograph. This wasn't, though. This was just people, two cops with a speed gun, and I don't think they were even in uniform.
Right.
So one was just holding the gun, and the other was just jotting down number plates. A month later, because I'd left it with the lawyer, I got the police around to the house to say that, I was now facing charges, A, for speeding, and B, for not supplying the information about who was driving the car. It ended up at court because, of course, I didn't fill the form in. I'd left it with the lawyer, but B, I wasn't going to fill the form in to say that I was in Galashiels at 11:20 when I couldn't have possibly been in Galashiels at 11:20 because I was in Peebles, right?
Right. Yep.
So anyway, it went to court, and they tried to do this sort of deal with me, whereby if I pled guilty to the failing to give the information, they would drop the speeding part of it.
Yeah.
And me and the lawyer said, no, we're not dropping this. So anyway, it went all the way through, and in the end, the judge just said, look, he threw out both things, both charges against me. I got off scot-free because, as the judge was saying in his summing up, he said, look, I have to believe both sides. You've got the police saying that at 11:20, I was driving my car at 43 miles an hour in Galashiels. I actually went to court with the keyboard player to say, no, I was dropping him off at 11:20. And the judge was saying that it reminded him, or there was a famous case in legal history in the 1700s when this guy was accused of getting this girl pregnant, and he was able to prove that there was no way that he could have done because he was away at a battle or something. 9 months previously he was away at a war somewhere.
Right.
So anyway, as I say, I got off with it, which was quite right because yes, I probably was doing 43 miles an hour in Galashiels, but it certainly wasn't at 20 bloody past 11.
Right.
The cops screwed up on that.
Yeah.
You see the point I'm trying to make? If they screw up, then that's it. You lose your case. But what was really funny was coming out. I remember,
let me just put it this way: judges don't see it that way.
I know, and they're a bit fairer. I think they're a bit fairer this side of the.
But the fact is that judge said he couldn't prove you were there at the time that the cops said. So there you go. I mean, that's how it worked. The judge looked at it, and he gave you satisfaction on it. I don't know what you're mad about.
Well, what was the best bit of it was that the lad that had done the gig with me that night, Ollie, he was 15 or 16 at the time, and he managed to come to court simply because he was off school on study leave. And so his parents were happy for him to come and help me out, So as we were leaving the courthouse, he says, "Well, Paul, that's good that you got off the speeding offence, but what's this about you getting this girl pregnant?"
Funny. All right.
He was sitting at the back and he'd heard that.
All right, one question before we wrap this up, because I believe Johnny's going to be doing something tonight, folks. And if you're interested in Tiger King at all, you're going to want to go over and check it out. But T1 has a question. So, and let's hear Paul's answer to T1. So, question is, if I'm pulled over for speeding, but the deputy's cruiser has a headlight out during the stop, do I still get cited? What is I guess because technically the deputy's breaking the law by having a headlight out. I mean, how far do we take that?
Yeah, but that's yeah. I think, well, certainly here in the UK, if you've got a headlight out, the police can stop you and simply say to you, you need to go and get that fixed.
Yeah,
I don't see having a light out as being an offence, whereas speeding is an offence, isn't it?
Right. Yes. Well,
that for me is a little bit of apples and oranges. It's not quite the.
And yes, Ali is absolutely right. He has uploaded his interviews with Anne McQueen. So those of you who want to go check that out. As I said before, Anne McQueen is the lady who was basically the right hand for Don Lewis, the guy who went missing. It's Carol Baskin's ex-husband. So, but yes, he has those. I happen to know there's other things going on. So I don't know. Well, they might not come out tonight, but like I said, folks, be watching Ripper's channel. Be keeping an eye over there because he's uncovering some very interesting things regarding Carol Baskins and Don Lewis and stuff. So everybody go over and check him out. Thank you all for being here. It's good to see Ali again.
Very good, yeah.
And Travis, it was good to have Travis here again. It's always good to have a little bit of a rain cloud, keeps you honest. So anyways.
Hey, listen, I was the only disappointed about Drizin and Nyrider, they never got round to my question of giving us their take on the control question. So I was hoping that you could finish.
I had asked too. Were you also asking? I had asked once.
I not only tweeted it, but I sent an email to Drizin to say, there was a whole load of questions I'd like answered. Like, how the hell does Len Kaczynski, if Len Kaczynski, right, if Judge Duffin decided that Len Kaczynski's actions were not ineffective assistance of counsel, what the hell do you have to do? What could be worse than what Len Kaczynski did?
How much more ineffective do you have to do?
Right? It just beggars belief.
Absolutely. So, yeah. All righty. Well, thank you all for being here. Those are my wrap up of my thoughts on the Tiger King. Also, I guess had to revisit how to fix a drug scandal there for a minute because Paul had a beef with me. So that's fine.
One.
So, but that's fine. We can always revisit those things. I know sometimes I have a point of view that, I have a very, very middle of the road or down the line kind of way of looking at things. So, and honestly, I don't know how to make everybody understand this. I believe most of those drug convictions would have held up had the state taken a proactive approach to it when they realized the problem. But see, and this is important, because they didn't do that, justice ended up being served another way. That's all I'm going to say. It got served another way.
When it got to the end of the program and it said about 35,000 people having had their convictions overturned, I'm surprised you didn't hear the cheering 6,000 miles away over there in Crunch Island from Galashiels.
Yeah, well, you're still feigning that Crunch Island isn't closer to Galashiels, but anyways, just remember Crunchberry Vineyards. So, anyways, what is he talking? Finality. Anyways, alrighty, folks, it's been fun. Go over and check out Ripper's channel, folks. Very interesting stuff. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.
Cheers.